Greetings, students. I'm Dr. Sadri, and what I'm going to do right now is basically give you a mini lecture about the PowerPoint that I already put in the module for you. This particular PowerPoint focuses on the little bit of a background information you need for international relation and international organization that are interconnected subjects. Okay, so this outlined, as you can see in the PowerPoint, is very basic. It's a 5-point scale, outline, and it starts with Roman numeral 1, the nature of international community; Roman numeral 2, characteristic of the world; Roman numeral 3, how to study international relations and organizations; number 4, what are the general functions of international organizations; and then last but not least, what is the future prospect? So let's start by focusing on the very first one, the nature of international community. Well, our community, international community, has a lot of very interesting characteristics that, it didn't used to have before, or at least as much. The very first one is because of the technological revolution. It seems like the world is shrinking. Of course, the planet is not shrinking, as you can see right there behind me, but because of the technological revolution in terms of transportation and telecommunication, people can move from one spot to another much faster. So it seems like, oh my gosh, I'm getting somewhere a lot sooner than before. Think about our founding fathers. As I like, when they were, coming to, to this land from Europe, they would get on a ship and it would take months before they would reach Americas. Okay. Nowadays, you get on a plane from DC to London is basically like what? 8 or 9 hours, depending on if they get on the right side or the wrong side of the, airflow. Okay. Not bad. There was a time that there was a particular, plane, which was a sound barrier called Concorde, and it could get from New York actually to London about 2 or 3 hours, And who knows, with all these, technological development, I'm sure that one day that, 8 or 9 hour distance is going to shrink even more. What else? Also, in terms of, passing our words and making an impact. I remember this. I remember that, my father, because of my father's job, we were moving from one place to another. And the only way to keep in touch with our friends from any parts of the world was by writing postcards or letters. Nowadays, how many people write postcards or letters? Is that right? What do? They take out their phones. Is that right? They send a, text message here and there. Oh, okay, well, so and so, I just landed. Oh, I'm just boarding. Oh, don't worry, I'm safe. You see? So text, Facebook, this, that, all these, it shows that the distances that they were once there before, maybe we are not as much. So the world is shrinking. What else can we say about nowadays world community? We can say that a lot of issues that countries, they could say, this is a domestic matter, it's not related to anything else. Actually, there is a very much of a connection between domestic and international factors. What is considered to be domestic for one country becomes an international issue. Like, for example, the way one government treats its minorities. Is that right? For example, if it's treating minorities, in a very bad way, persecutes them or something, like, for example, Burma has done with, Rohingyas or something. Is that right? It becomes an international issue. Everybody talks about, protection of human rights, and you can see that because of some of the challenges, in particular states, civil wars, etc., persecutions for religious or political reasons, people move. Is that right? And that's how immigration happens. So those factors, obviously, that are domestic in one country is affecting what? The rest of the world, the other countries. So that's the interconnection. In fact, there was a political scientist that passed away a few years ago called, James Rosena, and then he came up with actually the concept intermestic, which is, as you can see, it's a combination of international and domestic, because he thought that connection actually influences what policies. Last but not least factor I need to mention in terms of the nature of international community is the nature of the modern international problems. Okay, there was a time that a lot of the problems happening in one country was being solved basically, hopefully, by the government of that country. Guess what? Nowadays, that's not necessarily the case. Let me give you an example. The pollution that is created by one particular country, it doesn't matter. If it's an air pollution, it's a water pollution, whatever, it doesn't stay in that country. It doesn't say, oh, I was produced by country so and so. I'm going to stay within the what? The, political, boundaries of this country. It goes to the air, If they are creating, for example, extra CO2s, CFCs, is that right? It goes all the way up and what? Affects all of us. Same thing, if the creative pollution it goes to the rivers and the rivers eventually lead to the sea and the sea to the ocean, is affecting all of us. All right, the plastic problems all over the oceans in the world that is affecting the wildlife over there is a very good example of that. Okay, enough about this one. Let's talk about the next factor, which is the characteristic of the world. Now, is that right? What we can say is that there are three major characteristics, and I'm going to go and talk about one of them even in more details. But generally speaking, these characteristics are the authority structure, actors in the international level, and last but not least, the geographic scope. Authority structure, okay? By authority structure, we are basically referring to what? We are basically referring to the nature of international relation, that because it's a community of about 200 states, is not organized in a vertical way, even though the power level of the countries are not the same. Okay, so obviously everybody knows that, for example, in military terms, U.S. and Russia still are the most powerful, countries in the world. Okay, in terms of nuclear, everything else. All right, but when you think about their rights, the right to exist and the votes and everything else, it's more of about equal, status, at least legally. So when you are seeing these states in the United Nations, for example, which is an international organization we're going to be talking about more and more, okay, you would see that they all have one vote, okay, in the General Assembly at least. So the international structure is organized horizontally, while any countries, any members of that is organized vertically. Okay, so in the United States, even though it's very democratic, is that right? It's a very clear, chart, organizational chart. President, is that right? The top political leaders. It goes to the cabinet. Also then there are three different branches of the government. There is, of course, the executive, branch, which is led by the president. But there is also the legislative, or U.S. Congress and Senate. And then the other side, balancing all of those. I'm not suggesting they're equal in terms of size. I'm talking about they're equal in front of law. Is that right? Because there's the checks and balances. Last but not least is judiciary, which is represented by by the Supreme Court. Okay, so you see the difference between domestic and international in that regard, that domestic is organized vertically, and international is organized horizontally. All right, the next factor is the actors at international level. And there are four categories of actors. One group of actors are considered states, capital S, is that right? Or national actors. Another group of actors at the international level are what we call international organizations, or IOs. We're going to talk more about these things later on. Or they're also known as IGOs, intergovernmental organization. The third group of actors are transnational actors, which are also known as inter-non-governmental organizations. Some people, they refer to these, they get rid of the I, and they say NGOs. Have you heard? A lot of people, they talk about it. I tell you what, in international relations, political science, we really appreciate that word I, that letter I before, because if you do not put the I over there, then you don't know that the nature of this organization is being international, okay? Because if you just talk about NGO, but any pressure groups or interest groups could be considered NGO. You see what I mean? And that confuses two very different type of actors. Last but not least are what we call non-state actors. Is that right? What's a non-state actor? Any kind of terrorist group is a non-state actor. A liberation, movement is a non-state actor. Our founding fathers, when they had the liberation movement, here we go, they were non-state actors. Eventually, they achieved their goal, and they established United States of America. When we talked about INGOs, we are talking about, for example, Greenpeace, something like that. When we talk about IOs, we talk about something like United Nations. And when we talk about national actors or states, we talk about entities like US, Fiji, Iraq, France, and so on. Okay. Last but not least, category that we need to consider in terms of the characteristic of the world is the geographic scope. When you're looking at the world history, you see that it used to be very isolated, it became regional, and nowadays is what? More global. A lot of issues are global, and that's very interesting. Okay, now let's go into more details about the factor that I told you before, which is, if you remember, the actors at international level, the B factor from the PowerPoint. Here, if you remember, we talked about states, or national actors. As I mentioned, there are about 200 of them. Then we also talked about category 2, international organization or IGOs. Well, guess what? This group of actors, it can also divide or be subdivided, better to say, into 3 dimension. One is we can divide them based on their function. Is their function general? Do they have a general purpose like United Nations? Is that right? United Nations does a lot of different things. It does peace and security issues. It does economic, issues and helps people with that and economic development. It also tries to protect human rights. 3 completely different issues. Okay? But there are some organizations, even within the United Nations or outside the United Nations, they have one particular purpose. Like what? Like, for example, IMF, okay? International Monetary Fund. It's focused on what? In, the budgetary issues and the financial issues of the countries. It doesn't care about peace and security. It doesn't care about, human rights. It focuses on one particular issue. Okay, so it's important to know if it's a specialized agency or, for example, World Trade Organization. World Trade Organization is focused on trade. It's not interested in environment. It's not interested in human rights. It focuses on that. Sometimes they try to push these organizations to go beyond what they are, organized for or they're established for, but they resist. Okay, what's the second major characteristic of these international organizations? That one is the geography. Based on geography, we can say some of them are universal, some of them are regional. What do we mean by universal? It's an organization that technically its membership is open to all members of what? International community. Like what? Like the UN. Okay, before UN was League of Nations. They were both traditionally open to technically everybody. But there are also regional organizations like NATO. Is that right? North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Is that right? Well, it's very clearly shows that it has a region. International, for example, that's a good one. ECHO, let me give you an example because I don't want to give examples only from the Western countries. ECHO, Economic Cooperation Organization, which is an organization that, certain former Soviet republics are a member of it. Iran, Turkey, and Pakistan established it. You see what I mean? And in addition to Iran, Turkey and Pakistan, the 5 Central Asian republics in Central Asia are part of it, and also the Azerbaijan and others have been joining. So it has a pretty large group of states, and that's a regional one. Last but not least, categories right here is alliances. Alliance is a military pact. In fact, NATO that I mentioned to you is a what? It's a military pact. Is that right? It's not the only one. We also have ANZUS, which is between Australia, New Zealand, US, and what, and Canada. And but we had others. There was some organization called CENTO, Central Treaty Organization, that Turkey, Iran, and Pakistan were involved with the observation status for UK and what US. But when Iran went to the revolution, that organization, disappeared. Okay. Again, continuation of actors at the international level. We mentioned the first 2. Now, the category number 3, transnational actors. Transnational actors are the ones that, if you remember, we mentioned international organization. Who are the members of international organization? States, national actors. Is that right? So, for example, in United Nations, you and me cannot go over there and participate. So, I would like to, participate in your meeting. We cannot. We can only participate if we are working for State Department and we are representing United States, or for those of you who are international students, representing your country. If your country is Colombia or Argentina or Canada or Central African Republic, is that right? Or China or else. Okay. Now, what about transnational actors? Transnational actors, their members are what? Private organizations. They're non-governmental. Okay. Like what? Now these groups, they subdivide into two general categories. One are non-profit organizations that it itself subdivides to three categories I'm going to explain. And then the other category is the profit-oriented. So let's start with the non-profit. Non-profit divides into three parts. Those who focus on human rights. Best example, Amnesty International. Those who focus on environmental concerns and problems and issues. Best example, Greenpeace. A lot of people know about Greenpeace. And last but not least, those who focus on religion. Like what? National Council of Churches. Is that right? Which is actually very active all over Africa. All right. Now, the other category of the transnational actors are profit-oriented. And this one, the major categories are what we call MNCs, multinational what? Corporation. Sometimes these are also known in the United Nations literature, you call them TNCs, transnational, corporations. Okay. Last but certainly not least, category of actors are non-state actors. These are actors that, as I mentioned before, I gave you the example of, liberation movements. I gave you also examples of the terrorist groups. Is that right? Like for example, ISIS. Is that right? Al Qaeda. These are all what the Japanese Red, Army or something. These are all what examples of such groups. Now, some of these groups like ISIS, ISIS tried to establish, and kind of established like a mini states, but it was not ever recognized. Is that right? These are basically entities that they sometimes, maybe the goal is one day to become a state, but they are short of that in definition. Do you remember they defined the concept of state, political/legal apparatus that has 5 characteristics? Is that right? They're short in one of those. So this is something I want you to go and review. Okay. Now, the next thing that I wanted to talk about is the third issue that we are dealing with, which is how to study international relations and organization. Now, if you remember in a previous video when I was talking about the basic concept, I said, what do we study? We study behavior. As political scientists, as a part of the large category of social scientists, we study behavior. Okay. Well, we study behavior at what level? And if you remember, I mentioned a little bit about that. Well, we can study a behavior of a what? Of one powerful individual, as I mentioned, like presidents, prime ministers, secretary of states, Pope, foreign ministers, kings, queens, etc. Okay? So when we do that, this is considered individual level of analysis. We're going to focus on one individual. Now, what about if we study the what? If we study the behavior of one state? That would be considered what? Foreign policy of the state. Well, in our department, we actually teach some of that. Guess what? We have, for example, a course for U.S. foreign policy. Some of the greater powers also, they have that, So sometimes we cover the foreign policy of the, European Union countries or Europe, or foreign policy of, for example, Russia or China. Usually the countries we focus on are the more powerful countries, okay? So what about the third level? So the third level is the system level, and by that we mean international system. International system in itself could be subdivided to regional and global, okay? So as a part of this international system, of course, states are a part of it, the same way that individuals are part of what? State level of analysis. Okay, so at the system level, we have 200 states. We have like about, at least 500 international organizations. And we have about at least 5 to 10,000 what? INGOs. Is that right? Non-governmental organization. So at this level, we could be studying something like, is the level of, for example, pollution in the world increasing or decreasing? What has been happening right now recently is the temperature of the planet has been increasing. Summer of 2023 has been a very good example of that. In many American cities, like in Phoenix, basically the capital of my home state of Arizona, in July for about almost 20 days, the temperature was above 100, which was unheard of. Recent news suggests that in the waters of Florida, peninsula, our state, basically, the water temperature has got into, about 90s and even 100. And a lot of scientists, if you remember, it was all over the news. They were really concerned because that type of temperature kills what? Corals. Corals, they start turning white. This is what they call the bleaching process. And people, they say, oh, okay, actually, I like it white. Well, when it's white, it's dead. Okay, that's not a natural color, okay? So when it's white, it's dead. And you might say, well, who cares, Guess what? If we don't have the corals, the fish industry is going to die. Who eats fish? We eat fish more than any other creature on this planet. Okay, and then also the coral, when they're dead, they're not going to be able to protect Florida against what? The hurricanes. You think the hurricanes, they're making damage right now? They're making all that damage with the coral being so-called healthy. Is that right? As soon as the coral dies, the impact of the hurricanes on our coastal areas is going to be much worse. Okay, this is not Sadri talking. All you need to do is just Google it. You will see all the articles. Yeah, you need to talk actually, with people who are what? Who are, environmentalists, and they will let you know about that. Okay, enough about this one. Now let's go over the general function of international organizations, because it seems like these players in international level, they have some roles. Okay, what are some of their roles? Well, they have two major roles. First of all, they can act like a channel of communication. Is that right? So as acting like a channel of communication would be like what? They're a meeting place for different delegations from different countries come and talk with each other. Is that right? And it also provides an opportunity to meet more often. You might say, well, this is not a big deal. Yes, it's a big deal. It's not a big deal for United States of America or UK or France, because places like ours, guess what? We have an embassy in almost every single country you can imagine. Or in some countries that are very small, we have an ambassador at large. There is an ambassador in one country, but keeps traveling to the other 2 or 3 countries which are nearby. Do you think every single country in the world can afford having an embassy in all the other 200 countries? Of course not. So for all those, poor countries in the world, which are a lot of them, is that right? Guess what? A place like United Nations is important, because their ambassador to United Nations could be actually, the main diplomat that they have to negotiate with the other countries, okay? And they can see them more often. They don't have to wait to see, oh, okay, when is the session is going to be there? Oh, the session is going to start, let's say, in 2 months. No, they can actually meet, because in the United Nations, each one of those delegations, they have their own office. All right. What is one of the other things that international organizations offer? I can tell you something that we as an American, sometimes we take it for granted because we are a developed country. Okay? So we don't see that. We don't see in our streets Jeeps and Land Rovers of saying United Nation. You know why? Because United States is a rich country. Every time there is a problem, we take care of ourselves. But you see UN Jeeps and UN Land Rovers all over Africa, Latin America, Asia. You see sometimes here and there in Europe too, but not as much. Now you might say, what do they offer? They offer 3 things. They offer support staff. You have a problem with your economic development problem, their staff helps you. You have you're requesting a particular program to help educate your people. They have programs for that. Last but not least, they have money, funds. Okay? Excuse me. Last but not least slide. Okay? Now we are going to talk about what is the future prospect. Okay, if I organize everything that we said so far and try to summarize them, we can say a few things. Number 1, international organizations are not a world government, contrary to what some people say. Excuse me. Second, power of international organization is very limited, so they can do things as long as the states allow them. The world is growingly becoming what? Global. Issues are not isolated. And problems of the world, international problems, are much more complex. Environmental issues are a very good example of that. Another thing is no state, no matter how powerful it is, can solve these problems all by itself, even United States. So we need the cooperation of others. Two other things. One is conflict wastes time and resources. Of course we can fight and dispute with others, but that's going to waste precious resources. So what's the best way? Cooperation is the what? Economic solution. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any question, you know what to do. Email me. Thank you.